Welcome to Premium Cashflow Real Estate Investing Podcast with Sakar Cowley. During this program, you will hear guest experts sharing their experiences, best practices, and market insights. We discuss investing in multifamily apartment complexes and how a busy professional can passively invest hassle-free in various opportunities. Your host, Sakar Cowley, owns millions of dollars of assets and has done thousands of value-add projects over 20 years now. So listen in for insights. Here's your host, Sakar Cowley.
Welcome to another edition of Premium Cashflow Podcast. I'm delighted to have Reed Goossens today. For viewers and listeners, Reed is an incredibly talented and dynamic young gentleman. Very short years ago, he came to US from Australia. That was in 2012. He has a strong construction background, and through very small properties, he quickly scaled into syndications. That was a realization that he had, that to scale, to grow big is definitely a multifamily syndication way to go. And one of the amazing things about Reed is that he has a podcast. He is a author. He is a two-time best-selling author on 2 books, I should say. And he has done incredibly, powerful way to scale his business, and we are here to kind of delve into his story and understand, what it takes him. So with that, Reed, help us get started. Give us some background as to the incredible success that you have in such a short time. Give us a thesis on who Reed is, what takes you, and how you have quickly scaled so high.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, Sakar. It's good to be here and share a bit of the insight about what makes me tick, I guess. The question you asked, success, right? What is success? And those accolades that you just mentioned are very good. You know, they're great, right? I'm very proud of what I've achieved, but also you can never just rest on your laurels. And I've always been raised to keep my feet firmly on the ground and don't get my head too high in the sky. Sure. Check my ego at the door and just be a grounded type of guy, approachable type of guy. But use things that you see in life, like books and podcasts, and have a hunger to use those tools into order to accelerate the business, sure. Or accelerate the entrepreneurship life, right? Sure. And for me, it all boils down to fear of regret. Like the moving to America was it was an itch. I wanted to scratch it. I had no idea what was going to come when I moved here, but I wanted to give it a go because I was so fearful of waking up when I'm 60 or 70 years of age and going, well, I regretted not getting up and moving to America, right? Sure. And so the worst case scenario for me when I moved here was I was coming here to be an expat and just to live in New York City for a couple of years. As a structural engineer, I was going to move home. Like I had no aspirations to come here and try to blow it up, or try to make a life, an incredible life for myself. But through pushing my boundaries and through taking chances on myself, through betting on myself, because for those listeners out there, the only person you can really bet on is yourself, right? Sure. And by doing that consistently, by quitting the job in Australia, by leaving my family and making the big leap, coming across the ditch and chasing a girl and wanting to live here and didn't have a job when I moved here. I had to pound the pavements to find a job. Sure. All those things that you push your boundaries and you get comfortable pushing your boundaries. And as you grow as a human, you start to see and realize what other people are doing. You say, hey, I can do that. They've started a podcast. They've done a book, or they've done X, Y, Z. They've got into syndications, whatever it might be. And slowly you start to just get this muscle that you start to exercise consistently, which is inside of you, that it becomes part of your DNA to constantly keep pushing those boundaries as you grow, right? Not only as an entrepreneur and a leader and a business owner, but as a human being, as a partner, as a husband, all those good things that come along with the growth of, starting a goddamn business, because it's freaking hard, but you learn a lot about yourself along the way. And that's the beauty of why I chose to do this, because again, going back to that regret, the fear of regret, the whole thing that got me going in this world was, sitting back in my cubicle and back in 2010, after traveling around the world for a couple of years, I was back in Australia sitting in my cubicle going, geez, I can't be sitting in this cubicle for the next 40 years of my life. There's got to be more to life.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so through that, even if I came here and I failed, well, the worst, I still gave it a go, right? And that's what so many people don't. They're so afraid of giving it a go because they're worried about what other people are going to think of them or the failure that may come from it. And look, everything's risky. Don't get me wrong. Everything is goddamn risky. I may not have got a job in America. I would have had to move home after 3 months because my visa was run out, right? But what you get used to, or what you need to get used to, is stop putting so much emphasis on the outcomes and start focusing on just walking through the door that is opened in front of you. And that's
couldn't agree more.
That's the most important thing.
I agree with you. And also the fact that, you stated that the fear of regret, I think we all we can both relate, I guess, I came here on a student visa, kind of went through the professional route.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, man.
I mean, I can first time relate, and, this is the land of opportunity. First time it was fearful for me to buy the sort of the first rental that kind of, we crossed that threshold and quickly went into many, many rentals after that. But that very seed that, the seed of regret or being in the same place, many years, I couldn't, muster myself. I get that. Absolutely. Now, Reed, how did that kind of transform that? You kind of said, hey, you know what? I want to be in real estate. I want to do more. I want to kind of get into syndications or, sort of the organized multifamily, as we call it. How did that come about?
Well, so, before coming to America in 2010, when I picked up the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that was the start. That was the fire. That was the seed to really ignite me. And I had no idea what entrepreneurship meant. I just wanted someone to pay me to live my life and not have to work all the bloody time. That's all I had a goal of. And I had this other sense of sitting on the sidelines and watching my life go past, in front of me by just working, feeling like a small cog in a big corporate machine. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that was the real impetus to go out and try and be curious about different things and not just take what people tell you, go get a job and then, get a good 401k and all this sort of stuff, and go and try and challenge it a little bit, because that's what life is all about, living life today. And so that was the start of it. Through self-educating in Australia, I actually started to attend some local real estate events there. So prior to moving to America, I was already on the road, right? I was already curious. And given the fact that I was a structural engineer, I was already, it's surprising when blinkers come off, right? You realize, okay, well, maybe this job isn't so bad. Maybe I can learn a few things if I start paying attention, right? And that's developing skill sets. And I encourage everyone listening who is still in a job, if you are in a job that has skill sets that potentially could enable you to transition into a real estate firm, i.e. a development firm or investment firm, because you have a skill set that's valuable to them so you can continue learning whilst being paid, that's a really good stepping stone, exactly what I did when I moved to America. So, but in saying that, you asked how I got started. Well, so when I moved to America in 2012, literally 2 weeks off the boat, fresh off the boat, I am at my first RIA, Real Estate Investment Associations. And
interesting.
I remember being blown away by the network of these RIAs across the country, where I've come from a country in Australia where it had just coincidentally the biggest meetup, which only had 50 people, was in my hometown, right? So the access to information when I first came here now is completely different to what I was used to. Now, I think Australia has changed over times, but I was also in the Big Apple, right? It's the hustle and bustle of Wall Street and New York, the breathing beast that is New York City. Mm-hmm. And so going to these RIA events, I was like, wow, look at this incredible information. I had to change my mindset of the lingo in which I used for what I was learning in Australia.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And but then I quickly realized, wow, there are these secondary and tertiary markets that the barriers to entry are pretty freaking low, less than $50,000, and you can get a triplex. Sure. And it was a 4-hour drive away from New York City. I actually remember going on a bus tour to your home, or Baltimore, which was in late 2012, these little bus tours at these RIA events organized.
Sure.
Go look at these cheap properties. And I just remember going to Baltimore, and it was pretty rough back then. And
Sure.
you could buy a house for $10,000. And
sure.
I was all ears because I had $10,000. But
Sure.
you realize over time, looking back on that you'd have to buy the whole block.
No, I know. And that's where it gets interesting, is that kind of going in the details, is that knowing, what's right, what's wrong. And there's always you get what you kind of pay for, right? I mean, I'm here in Baltimore, for example. I gravitated completely opposite, going from whatever $50,000 properties to scaling up. Then, we're buying like more than $100,000 property townhouses, but it has done great to me. But again, the whole multifamily syndication aspect that we speak about is completely, it's a whole different mindset. It's a whole different way of how you do those things, right? So Correct. Now, speaking of that, Reed, how you kind of got into, let's say, the multifamily syndication, the big 200 unit thing that we kind of say nowadays.
So I was through conversations with a good friend of mine. He came down to New York City. He's from Canada. And I was boasting to him that I'd bought 2 little triplexes and duplexes in Syracuse, New York, and I was looking at a flip in Philadelphia. I was still working full time. I was boasting to him, hey man, look, I got all this cool stuff going on. And he said to me, he's like, man, that's awesome, but I just closed on a 70 unit deal in British Columbia, Canada. And I said, 70, like 70? And he's like, yeah. Really? How the hell did you do that? Where'd you get the money to do that from? He talked about OPM, he talked to me about getting a mentor. He talked about getting seller carryback financing on this particular asset. And I was like, oh, these are all the things I've been learning about, but I'd been only doing it on my own, right? I'd been buying these small little properties. I only had 2 of them at the time. And I quickly realized that, hey, I needed to get a mentor, and I've been putting off getting a mentor for a long period of time. But I then realized that I needed to take that next step in my career, take the shackles off and say, hey, Reed, you're worth investing in yourself.
Sure.
You need to get a mentor who can be in your corner. And by paying a mentor, what it does is you're giving yourself permission by handing that check over to say, I'm taking this seriously. Whatever, and that, they might be, average, good, whatever.
Sure.
The mentor isn't going to, blow it out of the water for you. It all comes down to what you do and the actions you take. But the act of giving that money, paying for it, means that I'm investing in myself, right?
Absolutely.
So, that was the first step. And then through that mentor, I started the podcast Investing in the US. He'd only done 1 deal prior to me joining him. And through that, I started investing in the US, the podcast, and talking about my brand. And again, I'm a structural engineer. I had no idea what I was doing. Sure. I had no idea about building brands, but I was wanting to talk to the international folks about the benefits of investing in the United States, which is I niched and I pivoted at the beginning.
Sure.
And because the reason I chose that was because no one else was talking to the international folks.
Sure.
And I could be the number one in that space because if I'm the only one in that space, right? So through that podcast, I then started building a small investor database. And then through my mentor, I was actually able to introduce him to a friend of mine that I moved out to LA, where he was working for a company, a large multifamily company, as an underwriter and an analyst. And he was a young guy, a couple of years older than me, but this is going back in 2014. And we met at a networking event that I actually put on because I was still working full time at the time. And I put on this event just to try and meet more people, right?
Sure.
And through that, he was already underwriting asset managing assets for another bigger company. He'd seen this deal in Houston, Texas, and we got talking, and I started learning how he was underwriting because I'm a very analytical guy. I love my spreadsheets. And he's like, look, I think I'm going to go do this. And I said, okay, great. I don't know what else to tell you besides good luck. But he's like, I can't raise any money. And I said, okay, well, I've got this mentor that apparently he can raise a bunch of money for you. Like maybe you two should talk. And I remember bringing it up to my mentor originally, and he said, he's like, he wasn't interested. And I said, and I went back to this guy and I said, mate, look, I don't think he's interested, for whatever reason. I knew it was a good deal. This gentleman knew it was a good deal. I went back to them and was like, mate, have another look at it. Just give another quick squiz. And through that, they ultimately have gone off to scale, and I think they own 10,000 units today. But I was there during this first deal, and I remember trying to raise $500,000 on this first deal, with my little podcast that I had going on, and maybe 50 investors in my database. And it was a cold shower in terms of the realization that I hadn't done enough groundwork yet with my investors, because I remember approaching 50 of them.
Sure.
And only 2 of them ended up investing. So
Right.
like I thought, and it was only $100,000. And I just remember on that deal. And again, I was involved in it as a co-GP or whatever, but it was the act of introducing this gentleman to my mentor and just sort of bootstrapping it. And they obviously went off and raised a ton of money, but I only raised a very small piece of it. But it was a good cold shower and really like an MBA at the end of the day, realizing, okay, you need to double down on your podcast. You need to double down on your message. You need to double down on growing that in database in order to continue to do deals with my mentor. And I went on to do a few more deals before breaking out on my own and starting Whitehorn Capital with Andrew Campbell. So that is the start of what happened back in the day. Was literally just the introduction of a couple of people and trying to make a deal, come to life, and it ultimately did. So
incredible. And share your thought as well on this, Reed, here is that one of the things I have discovered is like with all the access to information, the books, the literature, the blogs and things like that. I mean, we have the great advantage nowadays that you can kind of get on YouTube and listen to all this great content, right?
Right.
But the single-handedly, my experience has been as it's the people you surround with, the cues that you take, how to, what to, and of course the power of mentors, as you mentioned. Would you agree that it's the people, it's that influence factor that kind of catapults you to that next level? Would you agree to that?
100%. Look, I still remember to this day sitting on the subway in New York City before I even bought my first deal, and I'd been in the country 6 months. Nose stuck in a book, reading about underwriting deals and realizing, okay, I got a little bit of money I'd saved up. I could go spend it on a mentor, or I could go just buy my first property and see how I do. And the fact that I'd already moved halfway across the world, quit my job, like that hard part was already done. Like this next part was like, well, it's my money. I'm going to bet on myself again. And I'm going to go do that first deal to prove to myself that I can do this. I eventually got to the point where I needed the mentor. But for me, I got to that point of like 2.5 years of going to conferences and being sold things and blah, 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 and looking at, and this was early days of YouTubes and podcasting.
Sure.
I was just devouring as many books as I could. And I remember, saying to myself, you don't get to deal number 1 without doing, so you don't get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1. And you also, it's like losing weight. You don't read a book about losing weight. You got to open the gym door and get on the freaking treadmill, right? The same idea was like, I got to jump in the deep end. I've done enough analysis on this stuff, and I know where I want to buy. I think I know the risks, and let's go off and execute. And that's ultimately what I did. And then it's years later, it's come to being at, 16, 17 deals later. It's big multifamily deals that you look back and think, well, I wouldn't have got here without doing that first one.
Sure. It's the journey. It's the journey.
Right? It's 100% the journey. And everyone wants to have it happen tomorrow, right? And
Absolutely.
So many people quit, because they realize, oh crap, I'm going to become financially free in 6 months or 12 months. And there's gurus out there that can tell you can do that, and good on them. But the reality is, it took me nearly a decade to get to financial freedom before I could quit my job, before I had a green card, before I could quit my job, right? Talking about visas.
Absolutely.
So the journey is important. And sometimes you get to dark places and you want it to happen quicker.
Sure.
But you have to remember, back to your point before, if you surround yourself with mentors and people you aspire to be, you can use them as sounding boards to say, hey, you're doing the right thing. Just keep doing the work. Keep doing the work. Keep doing
Absolutely.
the work. Eventually, it will chip away and it will break, and you'll be on your way.
Incredible. Now let's focus on multifamily aspects, right? You have a big presence in Austin, Texas. Obviously, it's such a number 1 banner market with all kinds of great stories and things like that. Now, for our viewers and listeners, Reed, give us a sense of why Austin. What is kind of your investment thesis? It's such a low cap market as well. Right. Kind of like give us sort of behind the curtains, like why it was Austin, why not some other great city?
Right. So, I do have to preface by I transitioned. I worked for many years for a developer here in LA, and LA is a low cap market as well.
Sure.
And a lot of big developers that no one, this whole world of YouTubing and syndications and, this world that you and I live in, podcasting.
Sure.
My old boss was a guy from Iran, a Jewish Iranian guy who came out here after the fall of Iran. he's probably worth over $2 billion. You'd never even heard of him. He owns half of Beverly Hills. You've never even heard of him. He doesn't write a book. He doesn't have a podcast. And that's the world I came from, right?
Incredible.
And so he's made a lot of money over a long period of time in low cap rate markets. And the reason is because of supply and demand, right? I come from a country where there's low cap rate markets consistently, where Australia has only 24 million people, and we're on the same landmass as America, but we're all confined to the coasts. And so when you have high demand but low supply, you have low cap rate markets environments. So you ask about Austin. Why Austin? Well, we actually started in San Antonio, which is when we still got a lot of assets down there. It was more moderate cap rates down there. But the whole reason we went was for moderate cap rates. But as we grow as a company, you realize that the long-term wealth is through following jobs and is through following the demand. Where there's demand and there's supply issues, you're going to have consistent people wanting to rent from you for the next 30, 40, 50, 100 years, right?
Sure.
And that is where we are really focused on looking at markets that have sexy growth in jobs. So Austin is pretty much the poster child. I don't know many other cities around the country that historically was a secondary market. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, it was boom bust, right? But through systemized investing by the local municipality, the leaders in the 80s and the 90s, we are sitting in Austin today because of their investment decisions they made back in the day of attracting different jobs, employers, I should say, investing in infrastructure, investing in the local university and the local hospital, and building it around the tech space, and not necessarily building it around, say, something like oil or something more of the traditional employers in the southern states, right?
Sure.
When you pivot to that and you start attracting big names like Tesla, which just came out on the news that the Gigafactory, the Gigafactory is working there. Also, now that it's sexy, Austin's sexy in the fact that it's on the map. It's on the world. You think of Sydney, Hong Kong, London. Austin is now in that sort of sentence, right? You got direct flights to Europe 2 or 3 times a week. It is on the world stage. South by Southwest is there. Now that is also that hasn't been historically that. And you talk to a local Austinite, they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this growth." But then when you look at something like LA, or you look at something like New York or San Francisco, Austin is going through the same growth, and it will go through the same growth over the next couple of decades as those cities did back in, say, the 80s and the 90s and today. So why invest in Austin? Why invest in low cap rate markets? Is because we are looking for the long-term growth and wealth appreciation. And our thesis is that in those markets, you have the best opportunity and the lower risk to lose your hat if something is to go wrong. We're currently in COVID right now, and Austin's doing extremely well. The elections are over 97%. It's booming. And with coupled with the demand element is the most important thing in my mind for going off into the next 10, 20, 30 years of growth. That's where really we want to ride the wave.
Sure. Thank you for that detailed read. Now on to a contrasting question as well, Reid, that these high growth cities also definitely have a lot more new construction of different levels. Do you factor in that sort of, what that supply looks like?
100%.
What does that look like?
Yeah, no, you have to look at you talk about the demand side, you've got to talk about the supply side as well. So when you're buying existing assets, but you also got to look at how supply is coming to the market, right? And what's the barrier to entry? And when you're comparing, I've built stuff here in downtown Los Angeles and downtown Long Beach and very expensive price per square foot on the dirt. But when it takes 2 or 3 years to get through planning approval, to get to your plans approved, and then there's got construction risk because there's a high barrier to entry just for new product, right?
Absolutely.
Then assets are very valuable, right? And you can go in and you want to be sure you're not trying to compete with, okay, we've got a brand new building for 2-bedroom is $2,500 in downtown Austin. You don't want to have your existing 1980s building at $2,500, but you want to be lower than that and still be affordable in the market and ride that wave of where other things come up. And that is really important. But so 2 things we just mentioned there, the barriers to entry for new product, and making sure you're not trying to compete on price per square foot or price per check, as we like to talk about, with that new product. And you want to be the affordable option in the market
Sure.
So you do attract those blue and somewhat white collar workers who still have to live and work there.
Sure, sure. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And now, speaking of, sort of achieving your returns, or sort of riding that wave of, achieving the returns and kind of achieving, the rent growth and things like that. What is your group strategy like in terms of, like, let's say the value add, or is it more like a yield play? What does that look like?
Yeah. So we'll obviously, when you're coming into a market where it has low cap rates, yield, where you have low cap rates, and the thing you got to look for is cap rate versus interest rates. Where there's a gap. So if you're buying a 5 cap, for example,
Sure.
but you can get interest rate at 4 cap or less,
Mhm.
sorry, 4%. That means that there's going to be cash flow, right? But
Sure.
if you're buying at a 4 cap and you're getting interest at a 4 cap, well, there's not going to be any cash flow, right? I can tell you
Sure.
that. I don't need to look at any other numbers. I can just tell you those two numbers
Sure.
that you won't have any spread. You need
Right.
the spread, right? So you always got to look for somewhat of a spread. And that's why we don't like to go anything below a 5 cap when we can get debt at 3.5, 3.75 today.
Sure.
But we do definitely look for path of progress types of deals. So we just bought a deal in March. We have to underwrite it to a traditional multifamily value add deal. It's got some room to move with its rents. But the big thing that's coming down the road, and that's where you've got to look at infrastructure improvements, is that there's going to be a new train line out to the airport, literally half a block away from one of the stops on the line.
Sure.
That is a huge, massive thing that you're going to
Absolutely.
look at. Now, how do you underwrite to that? Well, you can't, right? You've got to underwrite like a traditional multifamily, but it has all this upside.
Sure.
The other thing in this particular submarket is that Oracle is building a new 1 million square foot campus office space right across the street, and they're taking 400 units offline. They're just buying the dirt and demolishing them. So then our existing product is going to be more valuable, right?
Absolutely.
Now, how do you underwrite that? You can't. But what you have to do is know what's coming down the pike, so you can ride that wave. And that's what I'm talking about when you're looking at bigger and better things that is going to impact your rent growth. It's going to impact your tenant base. It's going to impact the value of your asset. It's not just the things you do to the asset, which we do. The historical same things. We're putting lipstick on a pig. We're rebranding. We're turning the units. We're putting granite countertops in. We're doing everything that probably everyone else is talking about on this podcast. But we then look for above and beyond what other infrastructure projects are happening within a sort of mile radius of us that we can benefit from. We also look at highest and best use on the terms of land value, and meaning. So this property we bought, I think it's on 16 acres, but it's got a very low density of units per acre.
Interesting.
In 15 years' time, 10 years' time, maybe we can, if the city keeps growing this way, maybe we can demolish all those. And this is a 1980s building. We can demolish all the units and increase the density on the property. So again, thinking about other things above and beyond the traditional value add, because you have to, in these markets, and everyone knows that, there's not much more blood you can bleed out of the stone with the traditional way of coming in, putting in, wood flooring and 2-inch blinds and blah, 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 and trying to charge $150. You have to start thinking outside the box. And that comes through my development background. And that is really where the rubber hits the road in terms of where long-term wealth is developed, in my opinion.
Sure. Now, speaking of all of this, Reed, do you kind of underwrite a little long term, like things that you mentioned, right? So, do you kind of are you sort of projecting for some of that to happen, or perhaps it's more about, hey, these are the sort of the immediate near term returns, and then perhaps we have the other sort of these other activities where, hey, we could demolish the buildings and there's a lot more upside.
So the answer to the question is no, I don't do the latter. I do the former. So it's just a very simple cash flow model with moderate rent growth, maybe year on year is 3%, maybe not now in COVID, but when we go back to some normalcy, it'll probably be 3%, looking for some pops in rental, increases. And so to answer your question, no, it's not, but we do extend our hold time. So the overall return will increase. So we do 7 and 10 year holds now, knowing that in that period of time, they would have built the railway tracks. They would have, started taking that campus is now online for Oracle. So again, you don't want to try and force a model into that. And the way you would force it would be by assuming 6% year-on-year cash, growth, or negative cap rate expansion, stuff like that. That's how you could go and do it, but we don't want to. We still want to have expansion on exit in our cap rates. We still want to keep very moderate with our year-on-year growth. And if there's still returns, a moderate returns to investors, we know that there's only going to be upside if this other stuff comes online. Also, not if, when it comes online. So for us, it's no, keep conservative, keep to your values and the basics of underwriting existing multifamily. And if other things happen in the market, fantastic. I'm not going to hang my hat on it, but I know that it's coming down the pike sometime.
Sure. Now, speaking of your background, Reed, I mean, you are an engineer, structural engineers. You're kind of dealing with, really the structural aspects of these buildings. I mean, you name it, right? Do you think that the multifamily, the whole space in general is very easy from a standpoint of looking at it from a renovation standpoint and things like that? That's the easy part. Do you think that there are all these other pieces where it's marketing, the investor relationships, in analyzing markets and things like that? Do you think all those skills are like far more sort of important at the very same level? Perhaps you got sucked into, or you found perhaps easy from your engineering background, but all these other elements are equally sort of the equal pillars of all this business. What would you say to some of all of this?
Yeah, look, the short answer is you need somewhat of construction background to know what to do in these big assets, because they're not just, it's not child's play, right?
Right.
But you're right. You need the investor relationships. You need the branding and the marketing and the design in order to appeal to the renters. Excuse me. So when you're coming in to do, you're turning a leasing office, you're trying to make it tech thinking forward. You're trying to add work cubicles for people who, co-working sort of space / work from home now in this COVID world. So you're trying to think and keep up with the trends. And that comes through hiring good designers, right? That comes through making sure you're partnering with people who do maybe have that equity background or whatever. So when it comes down to it, the buying existing assets and flipping them is pretty basic, right? The goal is to always try and, in my mind, like move to doing legacy assets, but, maybe it's ground up construction, maybe it's owning certain, properties that are going to be in the family for many, many years. But you need all the skill sets. You need to be dangerous in all of it, right? You can't not know about it. And that's the beauty of getting involved in business, is that me as the CEO / COO, you have an ability to wear a lot of different hats, right? You have to create a company. You have to be knowledgeable in an area in order to delegate correctly, right? You have to be, and that really is where it comes down to, is that if you know about something, then you can easily delegate a task to an employee or a partner or something like that. So, so you can focus on steering the ship in the right direction. So to answer your question is, you got to be versed across all the different aspects involved in this business.
Couldn't agree more. And I've seen some repositioning that your group has done, Reed. I mean, you guys do a phenomenal job. I mean, some of the finishes, the takes, things that the designs that you have are incredible. Could you maybe share some aspects about, how you kind of go about that process? Is it a thoughtful input of, let's say your competition, or you're hiring great designers? Could you maybe kind of go behind the scenes on that?
Yeah, sure. So we do hire great designers. It all comes, design is very important. We hire some great designers locally in Austin. Actually, my wife is actually a designer, and she's doing some work on one of our assets right now. But good design attracts people to want to rent from you. And so the thought process of when a tenant crosses the property line, they want to automatically, subconsciously think that they're going to start renting here. So when they enter the leasing office, when they, when they come, they see the sign, when they see the exterior of the buildings, they want to start to feel like, oh, I can live here. And particularly bringing older assets into the 21st century, you have to go a little bit above and beyond with your color schemes, with the branding, with your amenity packages,
Sure.
with making sure that it feels modern, because that's what, if that's what you want to attract, young renters, right?
Sure.
Or you want to change the demographic. So
Mhm.
that is, it all plays a massive part in it. At the end of the day, the difference between good design and bad design, it doesn't cost you much, right?
Sure,
And so
sure.
it's about investing in the right people in order to give you the right ideas to then go off and be successful, and not second guess them, right? Like if you bring professionals in who are really great interior designers, let them do their thing. If they want to be bold, let them be bold, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's what you'll get a reputation from. And we've tried to be really bold with all of our products and our properties. And I do remember one particular property that we sort of veered away from the traditional big yellow bold colors, and went with more of a classical look.
Mhm.
And was a little bit concerned, but we sort of had to trust the designer, and ultimately came out great, and everyone loves it. And it's just a little bit different, right? And
Sure,
being
sure.
different is good as well. The old saying, being different is better than being better.
Sure.
So there's all those different things that go into it, and
Sure.
that comes from my corporate development world, where I
Sure.
work for developers. And when you work for the big developers, they go out and get the best architect, they go out and get the best designer, they go out and get the best engineers, and they cultivate them together in order to build a project. So they, again, go back to your team that we talked about earlier, they're surrounding themselves with the best in the business in order to be successful. And we do the same thing on our business as well.
Sure. Thank you, Reed. I think we are just about time on the podcast. A few more questions. Like in terms of all of the things that you do, right? What sort of takes you now? What are some of your next challenges, perhaps, or what sort of keeps you motivated?
I think what keeps me motivated is the what's my new North Star. For a long period of time, it was become financially free, right? And run my own business. Now it's about scaling and building systems and becoming vertically integrated. That's a really new challenge that I'm really excited about.
Wow.
It's also, so that means bringing property management in-house, going and doubling the portfolio in the next 2 to 3 years.
Sure.
Continuing to grow the brand, right? That's really, really important. Continuing to look at other maybe asset classes. So all of that is challenging. And I'm early 30s, 34 years of age. I'm also learning as I grow, as being a leader, as being a CEO. And so that in itself has its challenges. Being, encouraging people to take ownership, as employees to take ownership of the deals, is really building business culture. All those things come to how we will go off and be successful in the next 5 to 10 years. So, and I, for me, I'm really getting a lot of gratitude and I'm very thankful for the opportunities that have come my way, but also knowing not to stress the next 10 years, because live in the moment, because the last 10 years have been pretty freaking awesome. I know the next 10 years are going to be even better. So really focus on myself today and what I can do as best I can with the skills that I have today in order to be successful for both my investors, my employees, the company, my business partners, also being a good husband, all those things in life that you're really trying to be across a lot of different aspects of life. So you can be a good human.
Sure. And I always like to say, when you said all of this, like, it's easy to have a W-2 job and have an easy life. Wouldn't you say that? But that's not our DNA, right?
That's not our game. Yeah. And then look, and that's what some people get. That tick makes them tick, right? For me, it doesn't.
Sure.
And challenging myself every day is really what makes me tick.
Sure. I know. I think we are all there, like trying to push the work-life boundaries, like, and you rightfully said there, like, I think learning and sort of growing the firm. I mean, I've kind of gone through those trials and tribulations. We are vertically integrated as well. But it's an incredible ask. It's an incredible ask that trying to, get into that space. And you mentioned different asset class as well. That's a whole mountain to climb by itself, for sure. So now, speaking of all of this, Reed, I mean, you've done incredible in terms of, you are a podcast host. You have incredible 2 books that you have co-authored with various friends of yours as well. I love all of that you have done. Maybe help our listeners understand how has been your podcasting journey? I know I listen to your podcast. You've done that for years now, and I love all the different sort of speakers you have all the time. I mean, great business leaders, some of the awesome folks you have. How has been your podcasting journey, and how it has helped you in your business as well?
Oh, look, in the beginning, I thought who the hell is going to listen to me? My grandma and my mum, right? Maybe my dog. But it's nerve wracking when you start to take building a brand, because that's what I was building, a brand around a story, right? And my story was coming to America. And that's where everyone has to realize that if they are to build a business, regardless of what business you're in, your story matters, right? Being vulnerable, whatever it is, I don't care whatever your story is, but people are going to resonate with it somehow, some way. And that is where you're going to attract your business partners. You're going to attract your investors. And there's a lot of people out in the world, as you know, that do what I do.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to get every single investor, but what I can do is be true to who I am and true to my story. And that's going to resonate with some people. And I'm going to have some followers that are really going to love what I have to say and do. And that's all I need to be successful, right? So the podcast in itself was really a way to share the journey a little bit, share the story, interview some incredible guests along the way, and have a bit of fun. I don't make money off my podcast. I don't make ad revenue off it. I have a little bit of ad revenue, but the fact that I get to speak to people like yourself, I get to speak to other people who are on the same wavelength as me. It's like an addiction, right? It's
Absolutely.
My wife comes, I get off podcasts sometimes and I'm bouncing off the walls and she's like, what, have you just taken drugs or something? Because, it's the fact that we're at the same wavelength, and being an entrepreneur can be lonely at times, right? And so
it is lonely.
When you get on a podcast, when you get on and have a great chat for an hour and you press record, that is awesome, right? And that's what makes the juices go. And that's what I really have got out of it. And it's nearly been a mentor in itself, because I've used it as a crutch to be a sounding board, to test ideas, to talk to different, perspectives across the country.
Sure.
And that's been really, really powerful. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, Reed, there. Everything that you said, I think being at the level, and I think you get to kind of bring your own experience, sort of, ask those questions. And it's not about the money or anything like that. It's really more about the relationships that you can forge and, have a great conversation. And who knows? This conversation that very much that we have, we all know that, so many folks who listen to this and say that, oh boy, such and such podcast of yours was so helpful, that few tips that I got out of it really kind of, helped me kind of channelize my strength or come out of my struggles and things like that. So it's an awesome way. And I always like to, kind of bring my experience into my podcast, kind of ask the questions that they should be asked to different guests. It's not about just the mechanics of, hey, how you change the countertops, what color you apply. It's really not that.
No, it's not.
It's really about, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, people invest in me or in yourself because they like the story. They invest in you first and foremost, and the deal's actually second.
Sure.
So having that good personal brand is really, really important as you grow and scale.
Awesome. One last question, Reed.
Sure.
As you have grown, you have networked many times, on a daily basis, I should say. What are some of your incredible best advice that you have received that kind of, keeps you grounded and disciplined on a daily basis? What are some things that come to your mind?
It's funny you ask, like, what's the best piece of advice? The best piece of advice I've ever received is actually from my old man, my dad. And I don't think he coined this term, but it's a good one. I like it. A fool and their money are easily parted. And so what it means, it's got two things. Don't be a fool when it comes to your money, and understand how you go out and use it. And you can do it with any stock. You can invest in the stock market if you want. You can buy businesses. You can invest in gold. You can invest in real estate. But whatever you do with your money, don't be a fool, and don't let the wool be pulled over your eyes. And that has always rung true to me. And that is always what I try to think of about money. It's a tool, and I need to not be a fool with it and use it in terms of propelling myself personally, my family, and hopefully one day giving back, even, in philanthropic ways. But yeah, that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I have been given.
Incredible. Thank you, Reed. Thank you for stopping by on the podcast.
My pleasure.
You are such a dynamic person, and the number of people you have sort of influenced and you continue to inspire is inspiring to me and many of your listeners and my listeners as well. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Share with your listeners how they can kind of find you and learn more about you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, mate. You're doing an incredible job and keep it up. And just honored to be here. The way people can get in touch is just jumping on to reedgoossens.com. That's ReedGoossens.com. And if you're ever coming through LA and you want to hit me up, just reach out to me at info@reedgoossens.com.
Incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Reed Goossens for you with his all-powerful advice and experiences. So thank you, Reed, and myself, Sakar Kalve with PremiumCashflow.com. Log on to PremiumCashflow.com for experts like Reed who are always on podcasts, and we do have some insightful articles and blogs. So you can always log on to that and check out the content, but never miss the podcast and the great guests like Reed who come on. So once again, thank you, Reed. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Premium Cashflow Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at premiumcashflow.com to sign up for weekly updates, research articles, and more. We will see you again for another great interview with an expert guest.